Hey guys, welcome back to the studio for another lesson. This week we're going to be talking about how we can use small motifs to bring a sense of unity and cohesion to our improvised solos. I'll take you through a few examples of what I think makes a good motif in the context of an improvised jazz solo, and then we'll go over a couple of different ways that you can start practicing your ability to develop these little ideas in real time while you're improvising. We'll also go over a couple more advanced ways of utilizing motivic development in our solos and how we can incorporate these ideas into longer bebop lines. You guys ready? Let's get started. We spend a lot of time around here talking about how to improvise long, flowing bebop lines. And while you definitely need to know how to play those sounds, we also need to be able to hold things together and give our solo a center to orbit around so that it sounds like we're actually trying to make a musical point, rather than just noodling over the changes. All of your favorite jazz improvisers do this through the use of motifs and motivic development. Just so we're on the same page, a motif is a short musical statement that's memorable and identifiable to the listener. Now, these things can be done with melody or rhythm, but in the context of an improvised jazz solo, it's usually a combination of both of those things. In addition to being a short idea, I think the best motifs are also pretty simple to start out with, since simple and short melodic statements are going to be the ones that stick out the clearest to the listener. Now, not only that, but a short and simple phrase offers us lots of room to expand and develop it as our solo progresses. Now, let's kick things off by deciding on a motif, and then we'll take that through the changes to just friends. I think a really good place to start would be with a phrase that sounds like this. It's a really simple idea, but also has a ton of room to be expanded upon later. Now, check out how it sounds if we play this motif all the way through the changes. Even playing just this motif and nothing else, there's already the bones of a good solo here. When demonstrating this for you, I'm constantly hearing places where I could insert little embellishments and alterations on our motif. We'll get into that in a little bit though. For now, let's take another pass at this motif and make a modification to it. And this time, we'll play the same melodic material, but we'll expand the rhythm with some syncopation so that it stretches the idea across 2 bars. Here's how that sounds. Another thing we should do when working on this aspect of our improvisation is to displace the motif rhythmically. We've talked about the concept of rhythmic displacement a few times in the past, but I think it's especially valuable here. Even just shifting the motif around by a quarter note can completely change the character of the idea, and in turn lead you to new developments that you might not have thought about if you'd stuck to always playing the initial idea in the same way. Here's what our motif sounds like through the changes if we shift it forward by 1 quarter note. There's tons of other ways we could potentially alter this simple idea, and in the PDF resource for today's lesson, you'll find not only this motif and some potential variations of it written out for you, but also several other simple motifs that you can play with and alter in these ways to create new and interesting ideas. Up next, we're going to go over a couple other strategies that you can use to develop ideas like this in your improvised solos. Before we get to that, though, I need to take a quick break and give a shout out to TRUEFIRE.com for supporting the channel. TRUEFIRE is an online lesson library that's host to literally thousands of courses on a wide range of musical topics from some really amazing artists and educators, including yours truly. If you're interested in improving your comping, make sure to check out my course, Exploring Melodic Jazz Comping, available on TRUEFIRE now. In this course, I'll demonstrate and break down 17 essential comping approaches using TRUEFIRE's interactive learning tools. We'll work on a colorful variety of melodic and harmonic approaches using drop-two voicings, chord substitutions, approach chords, diminished concepts, and voice leading. We'll also dive into triadic approaches, partial chords, using scales as chords, and the art of borrowing notes and dominants. You'll learn how these melodic comping approaches can be artistically applied using backing tracks based on the changes to popular jazz standards, like Autumn Leaves, There Will Never Be Another You, and All the Things You Are. The link to the course is in the description of this video. I also want to take a moment to mention that I'll be doing a live stream through TRUEFIRE's social channels on Monday, September 28th, where I'll be answering viewer questions about the fundamentals of improvisation. We'll be talking about stuff like arpeggios and sequencing, chromaticism, and essential phrases, among other things that I'm sure will come up. If you've ever had any burning questions about some of the content in these lessons and want to be able to ask me directly, make sure you keep an eye on TRUEFIRE's social media for more details. And now let's get back to the lesson and see how we can further develop motifs like the one we've been using so far. I mentioned earlier that when playing the motif through the changes, I was hearing a bunch of different ways that I could expand and embellish on the idea. And one of the most effective ways we can do this sort of thing is to use our motif as the call in a call and response style approach to phrasing. I'm sure you've heard this term before, as it gets thrown around all the time in discussions about improvisation. Just in case you're not exactly sure what we mean by this, I'll give you a quick explanation. When we're using call and response in our phrasing, we want to think of a short, concise, melodic, or rhythmic statement, in this case that's our motif, and then answer it with a phrase that provides some sort of melodic or rhythmic contrast. In this next example, we're going to still play our original motif on the downbeat of every other measure like we did in the very first example. In the space that was a measure of rest, I'm going to play some sort of contrasting phrase that voice leads nicely into the next statement of our motif. Keep in mind, though, that when we're practicing this in real time, these response phrases should be improvised. For the purposes of the lesson, I've of course written out the examples for you, but when you're going through the other motifs in the PDF and applying these concepts, I highly encourage you to do so slowly enough that you can really practice hearing your response phrases and improvising them in the moment. Here's that example for you to check out now. Obviously, when we're improvising this kind of material in a more organic way, the structure won't necessarily be so rigid as this. That being said, this is a great way to get yourself to start hearing your way through changes with a more cohesive approach that blends long, flowing bebop lines and shorter, more concise melodic statements. Another thing I like to do with motifs is to eschew the idea that we'll play the same melodic structure on each chord change that we apply it to, and instead just use the shape of the initial idea and move that through the changes with more of a focus on smooth voice leading. To clarify what I mean by this, our motif in the previous examples always worked the same way. We started out on the 7th of our scale, then went down a third, walked back up to the 7th, and then went down a triad. For every chord change we applied it to, we were doing the same thing. Even E half diminished to A dominant flat 9 change. If you go back and check out that application, you'll see I was just thinking about dominant family there and using the C7 scale as a stand-in for that movement. In this next example, we're going to change our thought process a bit. Like I said, we'll keep the same general shape of the initial motif, but it won't always be from the same scale degrees for each chord change. Take a listen to how that sounds. Just like before, there's a ton of possibilities for development when we play with a motif like this in mind. I think in this case, it's even more apparent because the application isn't so rigid as it was before. And to give you an idea of what this kind of motivic playing can sound like when we incorporate all the strategies we've gone over today, plus a few that we didn't, along with other elements of bebop language, I've written a couple of etudes demonstrating these concepts as a single chorus of solo. To wrap things up for today, here's one of those etudes from today's PDF resource for you to check out now. Thanks so much for sticking around all the way to the end of today's video. Well, let me know down in the comments what you guys thought of the lesson. I hope you find the material in this one useful, even though it's a little less focused on strict bebop language than these lessons normally are. I think you'll find that if you really practice this way diligently, your solos are going to ultimately end up sounding a lot more cohesive. At the end of the day, our goal as improvisers is to make some kind of a statement after all, and not just to meander through the chord changes, playing all the bebop tricks we can muster. As always, if you guys did find today's lesson helpful, make sure to give the video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that bell for notifications too. If you want to access the PDF for today's lesson, you grab that, along with the whole back catalog for all the videos on the channel for just $10 a month over at my Patreon page, or by just hitting the join button right here on YouTube. A special thanks goes out to Ben John, Ron Maestas, Vladimir Zarate, Gary Dranau, Juan Duming, Alf Collins, and Daniel Alvarenga for being studio fans. I really appreciate the support. An extra special thanks goes out to these studio members for their support as well. Jeff Pack, Bess Obey, Manuel, Philip Frankenberger, Brian Silverberg, Nicholas Gagliani, Jignan Hay, Robert Gannon, Daniel Rogers, Gavin Williams, Moniz Dawood, Brian Roxas, Edward Ellis, Klebs, Joseph Ing, Chris Tondra, Chandler Zachary, Anthony DeChico, Darren Lund, Bertrand Chesnay, Andy, Paul Murin, Martin Vigers, Thomas Klechafare, S. Bruce1234, Mark Eslick, Robert Berlin, Robert Cody, Vaughn Davis, T. Colston, James Seabury, Bill Benfield, Sean Lepore, Apollos Gilibert, Justin Fisher, David Wortman, Aldo Fonseca, Artie Sanchez, Louis Rosen, Stephen Prager, Everton Armstrong, Stephen Schwartz, Max Irwin, and PH. An extra special thanks to Jazz Luminaire patrons Bill Jacob and Stephen White. Thank you guys all so much for your continued support. I'm David Shore, and thanks again for hanging with me at the studio today. I'll see you guys next time.